Generally speaking, a tally light is a light that is used to indicate to the talent either that the camera is recording or, in a multi-camera setup, which camera is active, that is, where they should be looking. In a similar vein to tally lights, all video cameras will also have some kind of recording indicator for the operator as well. After all, you need to know when you're recording. What's up everybody, I'm Jason, and welcome back to another episode of Tips and Tricks for the EOS R5C. And as you might have guessed, today I want to talk a little bit about tally lights and recording indicators on the R5C. Now, while tally lights and recording indicators can be extremely useful in many situations, there are also some times where they can cause problems as well. A prime example of this is if you're ever shooting through a window. A front tally light will often show up as a red reflection in that window, which is annoying at best and a real problem at worst. Likewise, in some situations, one of these approaches, different indicators or tally lights, might not be visible enough for you or your talent to know what's happening. So you might end up needing to use a different approach. For example, a tally light on the top of the camera could be blocked by a teleprompter or matte box, but maybe you can see the screen if you are using, say, an external monitor, or you have it rotated around pointing, towards the talent. In that case, you might find the new OSD Tally function on the R5C useful instead. Now, the good news here is that the R5C offers you several options and gives you control over all of them as well. Now, these options on the R5C start, of course, with just the front tally light. You find this just in front of the power switch on the top of the camera. This is a bicolor LED that will be green when the camera is on but not recording, and turns red when the camera is recording. On the rear, there's also a card access LED. This technically isn't a recording indicator, since it specifically illuminates when the card is being read from or written to. However, since the card will be written to continuously while the camera is recording, it does work as a record indicator in that way as well. Of course, there are the on-screen indications, the red dot and record indicator that you see in the on-screen display. Record and standby is, of course, also indicated on the top LCD. And then finally, with firmware 1.0.6.1, there is the new optional red on-screen display tally indicator. So those are the indicators that the camera has, so let's look at how we can control them. We'll start with the front tally light and the card access indicators, largely because their settings are found on the same menu page. If you head into the menu system, on page 7 of the System Setup menu section, you'll find options for both the tally light and the card access LED. And in both cases, you can set them to either on or off. Now, for either of these, setting their respective setting to off will turn the light off completely. Now, for the front tally lamp, this is pretty straightforward. Turn it off, it stays off, no big deal. However, remember that I said the card access LED isn't strictly a recording indicator. It indicates when either the flash cards in the camera are being read from or written to. When you turn this off, the camera will completely disable that access indication, not just during recording, but all of the time, including when you're reviewing footage. Now, because of that, this is one thing I would not recommend turning off. Remember, when in video mode, the R5C doesn't power down like Canon's photo cameras do when you open the card door. Consequently, it's possible to remove a card while the camera is accessing it, which can then potentially lead to data corruption and loss if you remove that card while it's being used. The access light is the only real indicator that that card is being accessed, so turning it off, yeah, you could see how that could lead to potentially bad things. Next, we have the on-screen recording status. This is the green STBY in capital letters shown when the camera is idle, or the red dot and REC in capital letters shown when it is recording. Now, for controlling this, you have two options. First, you can completely turn it off on all of the OSD levels by heading to page 5 of the monitoring setup menu and scrolling down to the Custom Display 2 menu entry. There you're going to look for the record mode or recording mode setting. It should be third down from the top. If you change this to off, it will hide that record indicator in all of the OSD levels. Now, alternatively, you can hide it only from the third level OSD overlay. This is the clean one with no other information on it except the record standby indication, normally. In this method, when you hide it from the third level, it will also be available or will remain available on the other two OSD levels. So this time the setting we're looking for is actually the display or DISP level 3 entry found on the page 5 of the menu or the monitoring setup menu section. By default, this will be set to only rec/standby. But if you change this to no displays, the rec standby indicator will be hidden from the level 3 OSD, even if it's turned on for the others. Now, as an aside, while you can't customize the OSDs specifically for each of the LCD, EVF, and HDMI outputs independently, you can disable them on the HDMI output if you need a clean feed for recording, but want to keep the OSDs on for the other displays on the camera. The setting for this is OSD output :HDMI, and it's found at the top of that same monitoring setup 5 menu page. Setting this to off will disable the OSD on the HDMI output while retaining it on all of the internal screens. Now, the final recording indicator /tally light that was added to the R5C in firmware version 1.0.6.1, and honestly, I missed this one in the patch notes. When the firmware was released, there was a ton of stuff in there about lens supports and the new RF primes and all of this stuff, and this was kind of buried at the bottom. But the setting is the Tally OSD setting, and you'll find all of the settings that are adjusted or related to this on page 7 of the monitoring setup menu system. So it will have pushed some stuff down to pages 8, 9, and so forth. Now, what the Tally OSD setting does is add a large red recording indicator to the overlay of the live display. Now, this indicator can either be a full red border around the entire image area, a red bar that's at either the top or the bottom of the image area. And visibility of this setting can be set individually for the EVF, LCD, and HDMI outputs. Now, having a big red border of your image may not seem like it makes a ton of sense given the other options the camera has, and sending this out on your HDMI output does mean that you won't have a clean recordable feed. Now, I didn't see a huge amount of value to this when I first looked at it and saw the mention of it. I mean, with a physical Tally light and all of the on-screen displays, why would I want to put a huge red border or a bar on my monitor? And then I thought about it a little bit. And the answer to that comes down to visibility, and specifically visibility at a distance. Yes, this is a niche feature, but if, like me, you have a cage on your R5C, that may obstruct the normal Tally light so that it's not visible from most viewing angles. Likewise, if you flip out the LCD so that you can see it, but you're 5 or 6 feet away from the camera, well, then you might not be able to actually see what's going on with the little standby record indicator. The text is only about 1/16 of an inch tall, and quite honestly, that's not the easiest to see, even though it changes color when you're 6 or 8 feet away from the camera. So that's where this new OSD Tally indicator really shines. When enabled, that red border or bar is going to be visible when you're at any distance away from the camera that you will know it's recording. To do this, we can head over to page 7 of the monitoring setup menu, and we'll take a look at the options there. Now, first of these, we have 3 options that are just Tally OSD for the LCD, viewfinder, and HDMI output. And the only options here are either on, recording, or off. So this tally indicator doesn't have a standby indication. It just displays red when the camera is recording and nothing otherwise. Now, the fourth option that you will find in the menu is Tally OSD: position. And here you'll find 3 options to choose from: frame, top, and bottom. Now, frame is a fairly thick red border that gets put around the entire image area on the LCD or viewfinder screen, while top and bottom add a fairly sizable, but at the same time not really that ridiculous, red bar to either the top or the bottom of the screen. Now, fortunately, since the LCD and EVF on the R5C are 3:2 aspect ratio coming from the photo camera roots, the top and bottom indicators don't actually cover any of the image area, while the frame will cover the sides. At least that is if you have the image expanded out to the full area that it can cover. Additionally, a couple things to note. The on-screen tally indicator does interact with the settings back on page 5 of the on-screen display setup menu. Specifically, if you turn off the OSD displays on the HDMI back on page 5, it will not be displayed on an HDMI monitor even if it's turned on the OSD Tally settings. It's also not displayed on the level 3 or the clean OSD mode, and it does not get toggled when you change any of the OSD display control settings back on page 5. It has to be controlled through the settings on page 7. So, how should you set this stuff up? Well, first of all, as I made a big point of earlier, I don't recommend turning off the card access indicator at all. For the front tally light, you should obviously disable this before shooting through a window or glass pane. However, aside from that, I personally leave mine on all the time as it helps me verify the camera is recorded, whether I'm in front of it or not. I also leave the recording status on the OSD, including my clean level 3 output. If I'm going to be recording the camera externally, I simply disable the on-screen display and as a whole on the HDMI output, along with any other assistant functions that might be output on HDMI as well, like peaking or zebras. Now, as for the on-screen display tally light, well, honestly, I actually leave it off pretty much 99% of the time. I did, however, change it from the frame, which is the default setting, to the top bar mode. Just because, for me at least, the top bar clears the text that I want it to clear and I want to be able to read, namely the exposure settings down at the bottom of the screen, while still giving me a big enough record indicator that I can see it from across the room and doesn't also cover up the edges of the frame. So, that is the tally light and recording indicators on the R5C. If you found this useful or at least interesting, let me know by hitting that like button and sharing this. If this kind of thing seems like it might be your kind of thing, please consider subscribing if you aren't already. And if you'd like to directly support this video and future content like this, please think about hitting that thanks button if you can, or buying yourself something you've always wanted from one of the affiliate links in the description below. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.